Good afternoon, and welcome to another Google Authors event. Today we feature a Googler. We have Gopi Kallayil featuring his new book, The Internet to the Internet. My name is Addie Brown, and I'm the head of industry on health insurance in San Francisco. And I'm honored to be opening for Gopi here today. Gopi and I go way back, having worked on several summits together, and now we're coming up on our 10-year Googleversary. He and I have been friends for a long time. I want to share with you a quick story on how this book came to life for me. I was out to dinner a couple weeks ago with Gopi, and while I was waiting for him, I sat at the bar and finished up the last couple of chapters of his book. The couple next to me took an interest in what I was reading, having seen the title of the chapter, Attitude of Gratitude. Now, this couple was very skeptical of this type of book, so it took me a few minutes to explain to them why this content and author were so relevant, timely, and different. Now, they just couldn't wait to meet Gopi. Within 2 minutes of Gopi's arrival, he had them and half the bar, including the bartender, engaged in a lively activity around attitude. I ended up gifting my book to this couple, and have since heard from them on how special and changing this event was for them. True Gopi magic in action. From Be the Bison, to Be the Ice Cube, to Be Grateful, this book helps free your mind from the Times Square world that we live in today, and really helps you take back control of the things that you have control over, like your attitude and perspective. I know Gopi doesn't need any introduction inside of these walls, but let me refresh your memory as to why he is so talented and why we are so lucky to have him here today. Gopi is the Chief Brand Evangelist at Google. He works with the sales teams and customers to help grow customer brands through digital marketing. Before joining Google, Gopi was the management team of 2 Silicon Valley venture-funded startups and a consultant at McKinsey. He also led large information technology projects for global corporations in India, China, and the US. He earned his bachelor's in electronics engineering from the National Institute of Technology in India. He received his MBAs from the Indian Institute of Management and the Wharton School of Business. He is an avid yoga practitioner, triathlete, public speaker, global traveler, and Burning Man devotee. His most recent passion is music, and he has just released his first album. I also just learned that he answers every single email in his inbox. Truly incredible. Please welcome my dear friend Gopi.
Thank you. Speaking of an attitude of gratitude, how appropriate that I get introduced by Addie, a dear friend at Google for many years ago, and her name could very well have been Attitude as well, given what a positive outlook to life she always represents for me. So I want to start off with a question for all of you. How many organs are there in your body? 20? Any other guesses? How many organs? And it's incredible, right? We're sitting there wondering, puzzled, even though this instrument or tool we all use every single day, and we're not even sure. I wasn't sure either, so I asked some doctor friends of mine. And they pondered about it for a while, and they said, we are not sure. It all depends on how you count organs. So then I went to my most trusted source, Miss Google, and Miss Google told me there are 78 organs in the human body, by popular consensus among medical practitioners. And the largest of that being the skin. Yeah, the largest organ. I want to introduce you today to the 79th organ that is now available to us, not created by nature, not created by some higher power, depending on your belief system, but created entirely by human beings. This little device here. And does that kind of shock you that I'm addressing this as like the 79th organ in the body? But in many ways, it started behaving like a human organ. It has a skin. You touch it, it responds. It has eyes. It recognizes objects, faces around you. It has ears. You speak to it. It understands you. It has voice because it can talk back at you, talk at you sometimes. And clearly, it seems to have this enormous mental brain power because this tiny 79th organ in the palm of your hands is connected to all publicly available human wisdom out there through the internet. And it can answer practically any factual question that you are searching for. And it must have a mind, spirit, and consciousness of some level. Because otherwise, why else would all of us walk around with our 79th organ so close to our heart? Sleep with it next to our bedside. How many of you do that? Okay, right, half the room. And most importantly, you go anywhere on this campus, or practically you can walk around any city in the world today, you'll find people with the 79th organ lost deeply in prayer. But all jokes apart, it's technologies like this that has become so pervasive, the numbers are astonishing. This past February, we reached a unique point in human history. There are now an estimated 7.2 billion mobile devices and 7.1 billion human beings. For the first time in history, we have a technology that exceeds the number of human beings. And that puts us at this unique inflection point in human history with a lot of implications. Some of it, really powerful, positive impact that it has had, this kind of pervasiveness of this technology, and sometimes completely unintended, unexpected kind of consequences. Let me give you an example of the first one. 3 years ago, I decided to visit the largest gathering of humanity, a festival called the Kumbh Mela. It's a festival that takes place in India on the banks of the river Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati at the confluence. And it's a festival that attracts 100 million people. 100 million people over the 51 days the festival takes place. In fact, on the day when I got there were 30 million people. And in India, when they say there were millions of people at a festival, it is not a figure of speech. It means there were actually millions of people gathered there. That was what 30 million on a single day on the banks of one river looks like. Now, this festival is famous for attracting a lot of Hindu holy men, spiritualists, monks, yogis, mystics. These are career professionals who've dedicated their lives to exploring the inner journey. They spend the bulk of the time in practices like meditation and silence and contemplation, which is interesting. So early one morning, I was walking along the banks of the river as the sun was coming up, and I spotted one of these mystics on the banks of the river. And this person, he was not engaged in a yoga pose. And as the sun was coming up, he was not lost deep in meditation. He was not chanting Sanskrit mantras. Instead, he was jabbering away on his cell phone. And I was thinking, what is he doing this morning? Who is he talking to? Lord Shiva, his venture capitalist? And I was thinking, what are we doing with the technologies we build here, driving to distraction these professional meditators? But all jokes apart, it is true that these kind of technologies have really put us in an amazing amount of power and capability in our hands. And I want to tell you one story where it illustrates deeply the extent to which it is touching human lives around the planet in a positive way. And for that, I actually want to take you to a tiny rice farming village called Chitalancheri in southern India. And I took this photograph 4 weeks ago. I was there. And this is a place that has a very, very soft spot in my heart because this is my home village. This is where my parents went. These were the pictures I took as I went down memory lane and looked at the green paddy fields that my grandfather used to grow rice in, and visiting the village temple and befriending, again, the current local resident village elephant, etc. So it had like a very, very sweet experience for me as I went through. And the reason I feel the strong sense of connection with this particular village and where this connection with technology becomes really vivid in my mind is if I go back several years ago and look at these rice paddies, they are the same rice paddies that fed our families. And this is where my grandparents lived their entire life as poor rice farmers. And this is the same village where my parents also grew up as the children of poor rice farmers with a very modest kind of background that you get to experience in a rural Indian village. So they grew up without electricity, they grew up without running water, and the only education that they have is a modest 10 years of schooling in the local Indian rural village school. And yet, they created the circumstances and conditions for their kids, me and my 3 siblings, that we went on to get 10 advanced degrees, including 2 from US Ivy League business schools, even though my parents had never set foot in America. So often that question is asked, what caused that kind of social mobility in one generation? It was simply access to information. But it was very slow access. I still remember after graduating from my engineering school, when I wanted to get information on graduate schools to apply to, I took an 8-hour train trip from the town where our college was to the nearest big city of Chennai to get access to the only physical copy I knew where I could get access to of the US World News Guide to Graduate Schools. 8-hour train journey. Now, of course, we pull out the 79th organ, and if it takes 8 seconds, it seems forever. We get restless about it. But it was still access to information that really changed the family's trajectory and caused that kind of social mobility. So when I went back this time, 4 weeks ago, I looked at the school where my mother studied. And in terms of infrastructure, it does not look very different from 30, 40 years ago. But for one difference, in that school, and tens of thousands of schools like that around the world, and it's not just in this village, but any part of the world that you can look at, kids with access to computers and the kind of amazing technologies that we are building and the information we are putting on top of it, now have access to the same amount of information as you all currently have sitting here, or somebody has at the top universities in the world. So clearly, thanks to these technologies, in an era where information is like oxygen, we are leveling the playing field for information. Huge amounts of benefit, and all of us are participants in creating that kind of an ecosystem, and it's really transformed life on this planet. All well and good. But that puts us also in direct conflict with something else that we fundamentally need as human beings, and that is what I want to examine in this talk today. On the one hand, so I say, illustrated with these 2 examples, these technologies are playing an amazing role, but it also comes at a certain kind of price, the price to attention, the price to kind of distraction that it brings to our life. And we're all trying to cope with the amount of information that comes. Because all of these technologies, they constantly clamor for attention. We have to respond to the hundreds of emails that come to us, the pings, the rings, the tweets. And it is round the clock. There is no question. The old rhythm of life, when the sun goes down, you turn things off automatically. Everything's shut down, and your body and the pace of life slow down. That is simply not possible. Because around the clock, it is daylight somewhere, and somebody's trying to contact you and communicate with you, and you feel that urge, that irresistible urge to want to respond to that. And that puts us in this very, very paradoxical situation. And that is, these technologies are useful. We need to respond to them. We need to work with them. But they constantly seek our attention. And yet, there are these other technologies that we use, which I'll talk about in a minute, that seem to need a different kind of response. So before I go to that, let's not forget one simple fact. Right now, even as internet technologies are playing an amazingly useful role in our lives, most people still do not have access to them. And it's kind of hard for us to comprehend and believe that we've gotten so much used to it. But even now, a full-fledged access to internet and internet-based services is available only to an estimated 2.5 to 3 billion people, which means most people in the world do not have access to it. And even in the midst of that kind of digital divide we are trying to address, there is one technology that is universally available to every single human being on this planet, all 7.1 billion human beings. We use it every single day. And I still think of it as the most sophisticated, most complex piece of technology that we know of. And what is it? Yeah, our brain, right? Our brain, our body, our breath, our consciousness. And with a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, I'm calling that as a technology. And I address this as the most sophisticated kind of technology. And using just a simple example, it'll instantly come to light. Noga, how old is your daughter now?
Almost 2.
2, right? She's learning language, right? And she's learning 3 languages simultaneously, right? Hebrew, English, and a little bit of Spanish. And this 3-year-old does not have to be taught complex rules of grammar in each language. Somehow they pick it up, wire these sounds and words. And if you just watch that itself, it is fascinating. We're not even close to replicating that kind of behavior in any of these technologies create. And that's why I said this is still continues to be one of the most sophisticated, complex piece of technologies, and we get to use. Not only do we get to use it every single day, I had this moment of epiphany when there was a teacher from India who came here to Google, and during a lunch, his name is Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev. He made this point. He said, your entire life experience will be filtered through this technology. Okay, think about that for a minute, your entire life experience. So right now, Noga is having lunch, and that lunch is being processed by this technology. You're sitting here listening to this conversation with me, and if you're trying to make sense of it, it is being processed by this technology. Before we started, I played a piece of music by the Toure Reichel Collective. And if the music had an emotional impact on you, and that is because it went through this technology, left some kind of an imprint on your internal system, and either made your heart race or made your mind calm down. So anything you experience in this life is being filtered by these inner technologies. And the quality of your life is determined by the quality of how this technology is maintained in a state of peak performance and optimal performance. And if you are trying to comprehend what exactly do you mean by that, think of the time when you last had, say, the flu, a simple thing that might have passed in 6-7 days. But the minute your body state changes due to a flu, all of a sudden your favorite food you don't want to eat, you don't want to meet your friends, the music that you might have otherwise enjoyed, all of a sudden you want to shut it down and curl under a blanket because something shifted in these inner technologies. And therefore, there is this simple fact and realization that struck me that the quality of our life is determined by the quality of these inner technologies. And this is where the intersection with these kind of technologies and what this inner technology needs puts us in direct conflict. So on the one hand, all of this needs your constant attention, and you need to react quickly, and you might be distracted, your attention might be fragmented. But for this technology to be in a state of peak performance, it needs its moments of quiet. It seems to need its moments of withdrawal and a little bit of spaciousness in your life. So how do you bring those two things together? So periodically you need, as I in a fun way refer to it, you need to unplug from the internet and on a regular basis unplug from the internet and on a regular basis plug into your internet. So thought about this long and hard, and how do you make it work, especially for people in this audience who live in this part of the world, in Silicon Valley, and work in an industry like this, and as I jokingly tell my friends, are actually actively involved in creating more weapons of mass distraction. So how do you make these things to come together? And this is where in the book I talk about some rituals that I've tried, experimented, that seem to work for me. So among the 32 chapters, I explore at least one idea about how do you stay connected with the internet while still taking full advantage of all of these outer technologies. So the one thing I want to be clear here, there are lots of advice and books you'll find and people talking about it, but here I'm not advocating by any stretch of the imagination jettisoning these kind of technologies. I'm not asking you to go on a retreat off to a Zen monastery somewhere. I'm saying stay plugged in, have full engagement with the life as it happens around you, and yet carve out a little bit of space, some kind of ritual that on a daily basis you are able to practice in order to plug into your internet. So of the different techniques I talk about, let me explore 5 of them with you. And if we have time, maybe even go into a little bit of a practice session. So the first one I urge readers in this book to consider is to focus on the essential. So as German philosopher Goethe said, things that are more important should not be at the mercy of things that are less important. Things that are more important should not be at the mercy of things that are less important. And the benefit of knowing clearly what your top priorities, what your essentials are it then gives you an opportunity as the demands on your life ask you to fragment your attention over many things. You can say yes to a few of those essentials and say no most of the other things that may be distracting you. Because then you're very clear how you choose to spend your time, your life energy, and what you choose to spend it on. So how many essentials do you need? I would say start with 1. Have a clear idea what your most important core essential is. Maybe 3. In my case, I have 5. And I'll tell you how I arrived at the 5. Years ago, I was involved with a Silicon Valley startup company, and it was a very stressful, highly demanding time of my life. Most of my waking hours were spent on building the company up, on the business plan, raising funding, etc. And when it got to a point when the stress was a bit too much, I felt I needed a break. So I left with a dear friend of mine to spend a weekend in a retreat center, in a monastery on the Big Sur coast called the New Camel Dolly Hermitage. It's a Benedictine monastery, and the 11 monks who stay there earn a little bit of income for the monastery by having these cottages where you can go and stay there. And one person stays in one cottage, overlooking the Pacific Ocean on the mountains, a beautiful setting. And the idea is that while you're there, you spend most of your time in a silent, contemplative kind of state. So they provided the facility to do that. And what I also found amusing is that these are fairly reclusive monks busy with their practice, but their URL is www.contemplation.com. And how a bunch of reclusive monks did internet squatting and grabbed a killer URL in their category just boggles my mind. But they did it. They have www.contemplation.com. So I was staying in this monastery and spent the weekend mostly in silence, because that's what they encourage you to do. It gave me a chance to step back and reflect. And it struck me while I was there that my startup has a business plan, but I have no business plan for my life. I have no business plan for my life. So I spend the entire weekend saying, I'm going to write one down. I call it a business plan, but something that comes to a close equivalent. And you might call it mission statement. I called it the organizing principles of my life. Essentially, I was asking the question, what are the top essentials for my life? And I was also very insistent, it should not be too detailed, it should not be too complex. I don't need to write a whole 30-page essay about it. It should fit on one sheet of paper. And that should be the case, I recommend, for all of us. Like, what is truly important in life, we should be able to articulate on one sheet of paper. And I wasn't satisfied with that process. Having got it down to a sheet of paper, I wanted to reduce it even further. I wanted to get it down to its pure, beautiful essence, and I reduced it to 5 words. So about 14 years ago, I did this exercise, and for these 14 years since then, I carry around these 5 words, metaphorically speaking, on my fingertips, so that at any point in time where a million things call for my attention, I always go back to those 5 essentials and ask myself, am I spending my time, attention, energy on those 5 essentials so that I can say no to most of the other things that are distractions? So that's one of the first things I would encourage you to do. Ask yourself as you leave, if you already don't know it, what are your essentials? Using that as a starting point, the second ritual on a daily basis in the midst of all of this frenzy I ask you to practice is to do one thing at a time. Now, there is nothing sacred about this particular advice. This is something that you've been hearing all your life. Your grandma told you this, and this is the equivalent of saying that if you eat vegetables and exercise regularly, you will be healthier. But this reason I felt that we need to restate and revisit is, despite knowing this, when it comes to actual practice, we seem to be struggling as a species, as a generation. So last week I was passing through an airport and I saw this woman in front of me in the security line, and tell me if you've either seen it or you've personally done something like this. So she was moving forward in the security line and she was pushing her bag with her feet because her hands were occupied. So she was pushing it with the leg. And she was speaking on the phone. She also had lunch in her hand, so she's pushing the bag, speaking on the phone with lunch in her hand. When the caller asked for some piece of information and she said, let me get it for you, she now cradled it, pulled her tablet and was looking up information with one thumb with the sandwich in the hand. She got up to the security desk and the gentleman, the security officer, asked for her boarding pass and documents. And she set the iPad down, reached into her wallet, pulled it, gave it to him, and then went back to the iPad. At this time, she was doing 5 things at the same time. And I looked at it and said, how did we get here as a civilization? How have we survived as a species? And I looked back on my own life and said, often this is the way I am behaving. It is the curse of what blogger Linda Stone calls continuous partial attention. Continuous partial attention on 3 different things. And I often catch myself, and I have to be very aware and conscious of this, sitting in meetings, trying to pay attention to what somebody's presenting and discussing, while at the same time, I'm trying to answer an email. I have 3 chat windows open, and simultaneously trying to get through lunch as well. At the end of the meeting, if you ask me what was discussed, I only have a little bit of an idea because I wasn't paying full attention. If you ask me how did the food taste because you had lunch, I couldn't tell you because I was just mechanically wolfing it down, and often probably send the wrong embarrassing text message in the wrong window. She did forgive me. So this is how we end up carrying on a day-to-day basis, and it comes at a certain price because this technology, the brain and our body, is extremely good if you ask it to do one task and you try to make it do 5 tasks at the same time, it completely falls apart. But when I talk about this, a lot of people today argue that no, an entire generation of people are coming up, they've become extremely good at multitasking. If that is the case, I would ask you this. How many of you would be willing to go into, if you had to, open heart surgery where the surgeon says, I'm really good at multitasking, and while I'm operating on you, I like baseball, I like the stock market, I'm going to have the TV on with both channels, and just pay attention to that. How come? If you're so comfortable that we have become a generation of multitaskers. How many of you have ever seen a virtuoso musician practicing on the cello or the violin while watching a game on TV simultaneously? So if you look at any example of peak performance in any discipline, there is a single-pointed attention that is being brought to the task. And that is what I'm urging you to consider, or at least catch yourself when your attention is fragmented. And come back to the simple ritual of do one thing at a time, because that puts this into a state of peak performance. And more importantly, your energy level changes. When it's fragmented, when you're jumping between 3 things, it exhausts you very, very quickly. The third ritual that I talk about in this book is commit yourself to at least 1 minute of connection with your internet. Okay, just 1 minute. How many minutes are there in a day? Math wizards in the audience? 1,440. Okay, there are 1,440 minutes. Take at least one of those minutes to just give yourself, the most important technology, your fullest attention with whatever practice that may help you get there. So I'm not advocating any particular one. In my own case, yoga and meditation are 2 of my practices just to unplug from it all and plug into my internet. This morning I did it before I got into work. A few minutes of yoga, a few minutes of meditation, it sets the tone for the day. So at this point you're sitting there thinking 1 minute of yoga, that's such a ridiculous idea. What can you get done in 1 minute? This is nonsense. But I'll tell you how I arrived at this particular decision and the kind of impact it has had. So years ago, after I'd spent some time in an Indian ashram and had become a yoga teacher, during the time of my training, every day I did 4 hours of physical yoga on a mat. I spent an hour meditating, plus many other practices. It was really incredible on the kind of mental mind shift that I experienced during the time I was there. I was in college at the time. I left that place with this commitment saying, I am going to commit myself to doing this every single day, meaning every single day I'm going to practice at least 1 hour of yoga and 30 minutes of meditation. And how long did that last? 3 days. I went back to college and my life had been completely taken over by staying up till 3 a.m., partying with friends and listening to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. So for years I struggled and I kept failing. I kept falling off the wagon. Most days I could not live up to my commitment. And I joined Google. I came here and I was still struggling. Many years later, the fact that I didn't seem to have integrity towards my practice, when I went and talked to Meng one day. Meng, as many of you, probably everybody in the audience knows, the esteemed and famous author of the book Search Inside Yourself. So Meng looked at me and said, Gopi, why don't you start with 1 breath? Because even if you're trying to meditate for a full hour, it's really 600 breaths strung together. You have to get past your first breath before you get to the rest of your practice. And since I'm a compulsive neurotic overachiever, I said, I can do better than that. I commit myself to a whole minute. So that is what led to this commitment of 1 minute every single day. But here's what happened magically. Now there was not a single day where I could argue with myself saying, oh, I don't have the time. Because my brain would say, if you can give yourself 1 minute out of the 1,440 to nurturing your internet, this technology, what is the point of living? So that became easy. It was a hurdle that I crossed, and now a week went by, 2 weeks went by, 6 weeks went by, and for the first time I could look back and claim legitimately that, hey, I did yoga and meditation every single day, even if it was for 1 minute. So the idea here is whatever that you're trying to do to form that inner connection, find the lowest possible threshold that you can say no on a daily basis and commit yourself to it. But then what I was not prepared for is the magic that unfolded down the line, which is on many days I would sit down for maybe a minute of meditation or for a minute of yoga practice. A minute would go by, I would feel so good internally that the question would pop up, what else is out there that is so much more important that I'm rushing off to? This feels so wonderful, even this 1 minute that I've committed, that I would go to the second minute, the third minute, and before long, it was so easy to get into a 20, 30-minute kind of practice. So something shifted there, and this is really what I'm asking you to engineer by starting with a single 1-minute commitment. So again, as part of this exercise, as you sit here and listen, I'm asking you to think about what is that 1 minute every single day on a regular disciplined basis that you're going to commit to find that connection with your internet. The fourth ritual that I want to talk about, creating some kind of a weekly appointment for connecting to your internet. So there are 168 hours in a week, and most of us, given our personal life, professional life, feel that we don't have that much control over our schedule. It gets hijacked all the time as people add meetings and demand us to be doing different things, which is all true, which is just one of the downsides of how technology has enabled our calendars to be completely exposed and managed and manipulated by other people, right? So you feel like my schedule is out of control, other people are dominating it, taking over it, asking me to show up at these meetings, all well and good. But of those 168 hours in a week, commit at least 1 hour on a regular slot, fixed day of the week, to something that gives you about 60 minutes of forming that inner connection. For me personally, it is Monday 5:30. It's a fixed slot. I teach yoga to the yoglers at Google. And for the 9.5 years I've been at Google, I've never missed a single class, unless I'm out of town, in which case someone like Sina or Arno will sub for me. But for the yogless community, we always make it available. That is like one commitment, it's non-negotiable. And I communicate that. So I'm asking you to pick one fixed slot every week that is sacred to you, and you communicate to your people who work with you, people in your family, and try to hold that. So the other rest of your 167 hours in a week can completely fall apart, no problem. But that 1 hour, you hold yourself accountable to it. Okay? Simple ritual, and try that and see how magic will unfold as a result of that. The final piece of the 5 that I want to talk about today is this notion of friend yourself. And what I mean by this is that ever since social media technology was available to us, it has put an amazing amount of power in our hands where now we are able to communicate on a regular basis to thousands of people around the world using one of the social media platforms. And we even brag to each other saying, look at the number of people who follow me on Twitter, look at how many connections I have on LinkedIn or Facebook or Google+. All well and good. It definitely has scaled how far we can communicate. But in the midst of all of this, periodically it's important to step back and remember that the most important relationship we will ever have is the one with ourselves. The most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. So even as in the midst of how your life gets sucked into the rhythm of someone else's life and you start feeling a sense of moral inferiority because everyone else on social media is having such an amazing life on the beaches that they have traveled to and the parties that they've gone to and the festivals that they are at, you still find that connection back to yourself, that friending. So metaphorically speaking, what I'm asking everyone to think about is, on a regular basis, listen to the tweet from your heartbeat, listen to the chat request from your brain, and listen to the status update from your body, because there is something that it is trying to tell you. And before you get into all these friend relationships, ask yourself the question, have you friended yourself? So these are the 5 rituals that seem to work well for me. And my main message here is not exactly if you feel free to replicate these 5, but find your own 3 or 5 on a regular basis. And most importantly, just to ask, examine your life to the extent where you say, what is it that I need to do on a regular daily basis to find that connection to my inner net. Because as I started off and said in the beginning, the most important thing that you can do is to pay attention to this inner technology. Because everything you've experienced in life so far, and that you'll experience going forward, is being filtered by this particular technology. And these rituals help you move this technology into a state of peak performance. And I want you to leave this talk asking yourself the question, or if you decide to read the book triggered by these ideas, what are going to be the rhythm of your life, the rituals in your life on a daily basis that love you to put your most important inner technology into a state of peak performance. Now, to give you a little flavor of what I write about in this book, I'll just read a paragraph here and there just to get a sense of how we approach this topic. And if you have time, then I'll go into a little bit of practice session as well before closing up. If all you read is just the foreword, then I would encourage you to do it. Pico Iyer, a good friend of mine who is a very well-known travel writer, and his most recent book is called The Joy of Quiet. He's spoken at Google 2 times. He agreed to write the foreword, and he's an eloquent writer, and his post is brilliant. So if all you do is just read that foreword, I encourage you to, because there's a way by which he articulates it. And he said, if Googlers and their colleagues in the Valley are the unacknowledged legislators of tomorrow's mankind, I thought we need people with this rich and humble sense of something beyond our ideas and calculations, high achievers who know the value of surrender as much as of control. If these Googlers are in fact the new millennium's first masters of the universe, let them be guided a sense of mystery as much as mastery, of unknowingness of everything we can quantify as well as everything we can. Walking around the mega screens and beach volleyball courts of the Googleplex gave me a sense of the field on which our new rulers meet and play. But listening to the music gave me hope for something more lasting, and he goes on to say, through which our engineers can work on not just our tools, but on the souls that put them to best use. And as part of the introduction, I went on to actually, Pico then continues, yet what many of his friends and colleagues are trying to do even more impressively is ensure that there is a space for Walden Pond, even amidst the digital wonders and blinking lights of the Google campus. And that helping to advance technology and our sense of possibility comes from singing kirtans as much as from producing spreadsheets. So one of the stories I described in the introduction, I was driving down, and I drive down the 101 every day. And one day I suddenly turned and saw, I don't know how many of you noticed it if you come in the direction, there's a giant Buddha statue on the 101 freeway. Somebody's installed it. And I just kind of, for many days, I drove past without noticing it. And it suddenly struck me, it's right here in Silicon Valley. I'm not in Nepal or Tibet or Bhutan. And what is this giant Buddha doing here? And then I started paying more attention to it on a daily basis. And I went on to write in my book. On my way to work, I passed the perfect juxtaposition of my two worlds. On the side of Highway 101, the main artery through Silicon Valley, looms a huge statue of the Buddha. His back to the industrial park where he sits, he smiles at the harried tech workers hurrying to their jobs at Google and Facebook and Apple. I don't know if they even notice him, but the Buddha, not at all concerned whether he's been acknowledged or not, sits with a serene look on his face, holding his hands up as though in blessing. Go in peace. Go slowly. There's an incongruity to it. A philosopher from 2,500 years ago who urged the middle path now sits along a traffic-clogged freeway, ferrying people on their way to most likely build products and systems that will improve our lives and connect us to each other. Yet also add to the frenzy and deluge of information we face in our accelerated lives. When I see the Buddha in that brief second of turning my head, I'm reminded that I need to pause and reflect on something larger than the day schedule that currently occupies my mind. And that is really the core message that I'm trying to deliver through this book, that on a regular basis, we all need to take a few seconds, a few minutes of time on a regular basis, on every day, in the midst of all the clamor of the rhythm of our life, as to what is it that is larger than ourselves that we are trying to do here, that we connect with, and how will we realize it. And then I conclude in the final chapter next, where I say, such enormous possibilities in our lives and staring at us. But to live in this new world opening to us, to adapt to the demands of the world that will emerge, we need new rules for living. Our children will need new rules. Going forward, more than ever, we'll need to tune into our inner technology and bring it into balance with the outer. In many cases, we can draw on the old ways that will serve us, the wisdom traditions that we benefit from 2,500 years of experimentation, trial and error by other human beings who've gone before us. This is a guidebook that never goes out of date, yet it is dynamic. We can build on it, move forward, for in our world, in our lives, even though we can learn from the old ways, we can't click the back button. We have to click next.